Yeah.
Do you know if there's a plan to go through these documents today or just what we got in J1?
Line by line.
Yeah?
Mike's bringing his breakfast.
Good idea. And lots of coffee.
Yeah, so the procedure today, just so you know, city manager's just finishing up. They'll do an introduction and then there'll be a full review on capital as well. So he'll do the intro, give you guys any opening for any questions you may have, any suggestions, so we can establish what recommendations moving forward.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Mike is not on? Mike not on yet?
Thank you.
If you want to make a comment, is there any kind of electronic way that we indicate that we want to do that, or you just raise your hand or get it to someone?
Scream as loud as you
Okay.
can.
Used to be an electronic hand raising
Yeah.
thing that
When they,
seems to not have worked.
We need that back.
yeah, when they put this in, it's supposed to be on the screen, but I guess we don't have access. There was that button you would push if you had a,
Where's the button?
there is a.
No, that's, it
Yeah.
used to be. What, was
Yeah.
there? I don't know.
The old system, you have a button here and then it would light up in front of the chair.
Okay.
And then he could select it and it would turn the light off and it would also let you know the order in which they came in.
Ah, interesting.
Anytime we can get going.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Redondo Beach Budget and Finance Committee meeting of June 8th. Doug, can we do a formal roll call?
Commissioner Conroy,
Here.
Commissioner Jesty.
Here.
Commissioner Castle.
Here.
Chair Marin,
Here.
Commissioner Woodham.
Here.
Commissioner Samples.
Here.
Commissioner Sherbin.
Here. Great. Can we take a moment to salute the flag? We stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item D, approval for the order of agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
I move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item E, blue folder items. I don't see any blue folder items on the docket. Item F, consent calendar. Does anyone want to pull anything specifically from the consent calendar? Can I get a motion to approve the posting of the regular Budget and Finance Committee meeting of June 8th, as well as the minutes from April 13th and May 11th?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Item G, there don't appear to be any excluded consent calendar items this evening. Item H, public participation of non-agenda items. I don't see any members of the public who wish to participate.
Yeah, there's no attendees on Zoom, no e-comments.
Great. Item I, don't appear to be any items continued from previous agendas. So moving on to item J1, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2023-2024 city manager's proposed budget and 5-year capital improvement program.
Good evening.
Thanks, Doug. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you.
You too.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here. Mike Wasansky, city manager. I think you all know that, but for the record, I've got Wendy here with me this evening, as well as Jesse Reyes, who's going to help with the capital budget presentation. So you get a little detail on that tonight as well. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the documents. Hopefully you've had a little bit of a chance to review them. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I know the commission always does. Your charge tonight really is to deliberate, discuss the budget, ask your questions, and at the end of it, as you typically do, provide whatever policy advice and counsel you'd like to the council. Typically, you prepare a letter. You sometimes might designate a few folks on the commission to help you draft it and kind of get it out. But sometimes your input can be codified through a budget motion, and then we can just carry that as input for city council consideration later. You've done it multiple ways over the years. So sky's the limit. It's ultimately up to the commission. Yes.
Hi, Mike, before you hop in, is this information that's already been presented to council?
Oh, council has had 3 budget hearings.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, council has 3 budget hearings, but they're not adopting the budget until June 20th. So they've got 2 more hearings to go.
Okay.
They're eager to get your input. One of the budget response reports that they will receive, as they do each year, is the advice that's been provided by the various commissions. You're the first commission I'm meeting with since the delivery of the budget. Harbor Commission next week will be discussing the budget, providing their counsel, and then the Planning Commission has an obligation to ensure that the capital budget aligns with the general plan. So those 3 commissions typically have a chance to get an in-depth review of the proposed budget and provide policy advice to the city council. That's really what you're here doing tonight. You provided input to me as we got into the budget decision or budget preparation process. This is your chance to now react to the proposed budget, react to the data, ask your hard questions, and then ultimately make your suggestions to council. So with that, Wendy, if you could, next slide, please. Just a refresher, this group knows this fairly well. The budget document itself is made up of a variety of things, but really sort of 4 fundamental concepts drive our budget deliberation process. The budget opens with my message, the budget message, where I try to synthesize and summarize the high points in the budget and really help tell the story of what we're facing this fiscal year. We always begin when we prepare the budget with our understanding of our core expenditures and core revenues. I think this group's all familiar with what those are. Those are our pre-existing commitments to labor and personnel costs, might be pension costs, our traditional maintenance and operations expenditures that have been part and parcel to operating budgets for quite some time, our internal service fund allocations, et cetera. So we start with the basics, really the stuff that you would expect to carry over, barring some change. And then from there, as part of my message, I lay out 77 decision packages, which are really an explanation of proposed modifications to the city's core budget. There's a lot to digest there. There always is. I'm sure you'll have some opinions on them. Some you might like, some you may not. We've had those conversations in the past, and that's really one of the things I think you want to think about tonight as you make your recommendations to council. And then lastly, what the council, and it's a process we've created over the last few years to help, I think, provide supplemental information to the community, to the council, to follow up on inquiries that are budget related. We've created the Budget Response Report program, which I can tell you after looking at the list today and finalizing the most recent round of questions, we are up to now 69 Budget Response Report questions. They effectively, many of you have seen them, start with a query and then there's an answer. We try to keep them in a kind of an FAQ format to keep them concise, to the point, so the council can ask a very specific question about a cost prospectively for a project or a program change, or sometimes just asking more detail about how we replace equipment or what specific vehicles might be proposed this year for updating, et cetera. So it's a great way to offer that supplemental information. And sometimes if we have positive budget years, it's typically an opportunity for them to pluck out projects that they're interested in seeing added to the budget. And then there's at least a known cost item there that flows into the adopted budget. So we're not guessing the night of budget motion making. So it's a really good process.
So, Mike, on those budget response reports, you said a number of them have been completed already. Is there
24.
is there some reason that we don't have access to them, haven't had access to them?
Oh, they should be on the link. You should absolutely have them there. They're posted on the link in real time on the city's website.
I didn't see them.
Yeah,
Okay.
they
So-
are there. We have them as a standalone item, so you can check that in real time. You'll get another deposit of those tomorrow night, and then there'll be another deposit on the 13th, and then whatever's remaining and outstanding will be in the packet and deposited the following Thursday evening.
So basically, it'll be the city council is the only one that will be able to actually take any action on those budget response reports.
Yeah, typically, yeah. I mean, because they're supplemental to budget anyway. So really what they are is they're an explanation. They might be something in particular that you all look at or see, or it might be an item that you have already suggested or one that you'd like to suggest as part of your budget motion tonight or suggestion. But it's not part and parcel of the budget. It has to be added to their final motion for it to be included.
Okay, I just, as I recall, those response reports are often responses to questions that are generated by the decision packages. We may well have questions tonight on things that you've already addressed or are in the
You
process of
may.
addressing.
Yeah, you may. And if they are, I'll let you know that tonight. I'll explain that to you and I'll point you to that particular budget response report. I've got a list for you so you can reference that and go straight to that if you want to follow up on that item. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So that's really what helps us facilitate the effort. And that's really the core functions as you consider the budget and what you review. Next slide, please, Wendy.
Then your next slide.
Oh, one more slide. Is that not coming up? Still on it. There we go. All right. So this is effectively the summary of the budget as proposed. We started with $2.4 million. That was what we had estimated at mid-year to be remaining when we closed the books on 22-23 next fall. So we begin with that. We look at our core revenues, which I'll break down in summary here in a bit, but speak to our core taxes, charges for services, et cetera. That number this year is at about $104.5 million. Our core expenditures, which are down a little bit this year compared to years past, but are still and are quite a bit down from where we were with our previous adopted budget. And the reason for that is because last year's budget and the year prior had a significant amount of one-time funding in it for the pension refinancing, the bond residual proceeds, as well as the money, as I mentioned to you all, that we received from the federal government to help offset COVID concerns. So the budget in total expenditure is down year over year because those one-time projects have flown, are now no longer active. Now, what could happen when we carry over the budget next year, when we actually carry over this year's expenses to next for the projects that were funded through one-time monies that aren't complete, we'll likely pick that money up, bring it over, and continue to execute whatever that work item is. So the adopted budget will be a number. The carryover budget, once it's approved at year end, could actually be an even higher number, which will be reflected when we talk about it next mid-year. The decision packages that are ongoing have a net cost of a little over $2.1 million. It's a combination. There are significant new revenues that are proposed, about $1.7 million in new revenues. And then there are another roughly $4 million, a little under that, in ongoing expenditures that are proposed. Most of these expenditures, as I mentioned to you when we were first discussing this last month, is to continue the programs that were piloted in prior years that we now believe should be permanent, and in some instances are expanding in areas where we think we have new service demands and gaps for service. So that's what you'll see in the recommended ongoing decision packages. Nothing that's in this document was taken lightly. We had several deliberative discussions with the department heads in preparing the decision packages. We did it a little differently this year because we were compressed on time. We didn't have the department submit all of their wants and needs in document form, so we would then sit down and gather it and go through it. I had meetings with the department heads on a one-on-one basis to initially screen their desired expenses and then have them submit the items that I had a fair feeling we would be likely to recommend given resources. So we did a bit of a pre-screen. But I will tell you, I was a little surprised when I finally laid out the budget that we had 77 additional decision packages. I swore last year when we had 81, we would never be that close to that again. But there was really, I thought, there was good thinking, particularly on the revenue side of the equation. There was, I thought, some surprisingly well-positioned reorganization packages that were cheaper than I feared they might cost. And at the end of the day, the 77 really, they all have a story to tell and they all have merit, at least in my view. And there is depth behind that paragraph that's there that may not come across as a simple, set of sentences. The one-time decision packages, just back up a little bit there, Wendy, sorry. The one-time decision packages are pretty straightforward. You'll see what they are. This year, we did not recommend a CIP allocation above and beyond the normal $1 million we have to spend. We just didn't have quite the resources for that. So when it's all said and done, we begin with the $2.4 million. And if all of the decision packages are approved by council as proposed, we would end our fund balance with an unallocated amount of roughly $1.7 million.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So you said there's no additional CIP allocation other than the 1 million. Is the 1 million included in the core expenditures then?
No, the 1 million has already been transferred to the capital projects fund by way of the year-end designation action that occurred. So you'll recall when we closed the books out on the prior fiscal year, the council will designate certain resources. Typically, part of that designation is $1 million if we have it to the capital projects fund. So that money's already been transferred there.
If we have it. So because there's a line item here, I would expect that sometimes there's a CIP allocation recommendation as well.
Sometimes there is, and it's there in part to remind council this year there isn't anything additional. You might remember last year we recommended roughly $4 million of general fund money be put into the CIP for a couple of key projects, the parking structure repair down to the harbor, and then a few other smaller elements. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember we spoke at length with you regarding those, and as a body, we were in favor of some and not in favor of others.
Right.
So does that, you mentioned 4 million?
Yeah.
And so
They
that
didn't
was
ultimately approve the full 4. They cut that down.
Okay.
They actually, they shaved the scope of those parking structure repairs. Jess, you should be able to explain that to you, but I think in the end of the day, they ended up awarding or allocating a little over $2 million to the parking structure repair. And then I think there was some additional work for some efforts on International Boardwalk and the like, but they tweaked that a touch in the final motion.
Okay, so to the extent that we're not having a recommended CIP allocation in addition to that, would that imply that we were somewhat fiscally conservative?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I think it's helpful to know that we had the 1 million already there in the cap projects fund. You'll see those recommendations here in a second. And that's big. If we didn't have that, we started with 2.4 million, I might say, yeah, let's get our million in there because we need to kind of continue to commit to that. But this year, given everything else we were doing, we didn't feel it appropriate to make that extra commitment to capital. We need to continue to focus on what we've already got on the books and try to work through those projects. You'll see here in a second, we're at 130 total capital projects. We're getting through them. We're spending more money this year than we ever have. I'll have a slide on that in a second. But I just felt we have enough backlog. We didn't need to actually add to the budget right now. And there are some other operating concerns. One of the big decision packages in here, and we'll talk about it in a second, is a $1.8 million set aside for wage and labor, basically salary and benefit investment. And rather than hide the ball, leave it there unallocated and let it be a mystery, I've made a policy recommendation, council, that we invest in our employees now. We set it aside in the budget. We make it clear that we have that ongoing expense looming. So there's no catch up later. The goal with this budget was to try to get us to structural balance. And if all of these decision packages are approved, we are actually above structural balance. We have roughly, depending on where we finish with compensated absences and some of the general ledger accounting corrections we're going to make in our final budget response report on that, we're about $1 million ongoing revenues above ongoing expenses if approved as proposed, which is first time I've been able to communicate that in quite some time. I was expecting we were going to need some bridge funding this year. The strength of revenues and I think a commitment to staffing and a reduction in some instances in overtime is allowing us to remain, or at least project or forecast structural balance. And that's without, and you'll see here in a second, without us being at tip top on the TOT side of the equation. So all said and done, we're left with about $1.7 million of unallocated funds. Typically, the council, when they see that, will like to supplement some of the decision packages and add to the budget motion, so that number could change upon final adoption. But as recommended, there's a little bit of money there to play with, so to speak. So next slide, Wendy. So here's a snapshot of our general fund tax revenues, kind of where we stand. We're in a strong position year over year, and even half year over mid-year. Roughly $3 million of ongoing structural taxes are proposed based on estimates. Our property tax estimates we do in consultation with HDL. They track for us constantly where we're at. We feel fairly good about that $33.2 million estimate. Sales and use tax down a touch. Last year, I think was sort of a peak year coming out of the pandemic. This year we fell off a bit. Again, I think partly due to the fact that the South Bay Social District is struggling to really kind of reboot and move on. So 11.5 is still much better than we were at a couple of years ago, but we had hoped to see that thing trend up a little bit closer to 12 million this year. We kind of went the other direction. So we're at about 11.5 million. Maybe it's a conservative figure, but I'd rather be there than forecasting something we don't collect. Property tax in lieu is really is indexed to the general property tax figure, so that number is fairly consistent. It's a little bit lower over mid-year, just based on what was an extraordinary year this year in particular. Utility user tax is a high mark for us. We had a fairly significant bump in utility prices in the last 2 years. That seems to be sustained. It's not indexed to what we have experienced in the wintertime where it was absolutely crazy. That 8.5 million is a little bit more conservative than that. Eugene and I spent some time kind of going through. We receive a report on all of the various utilities, kind of where things are performing in the market, what the forecasts are. The basis of that report I thought was good. We talked about it, and we landed on this as being a pretty good conservative number. Still, though, significantly higher than where we were going into the adopted budget, and even where we left it at mid-year at about 7 million to start. So that's a bright spot, surprising bright spot in the budget. We haven't had increases in UUT in quite some time. And then on the TOT side, I mentioned at 6.7 million, we're still below what I think can operate at on a peak basis. Pre-pandemic, we were close to $9 million. Marine Avenue Hotel sites were really humming along. We're not there. We're climbing. We're getting a little closer, but we're not there. I think if we're optimal on our visitor basis, that number should be closer to 10, but we're just not there yet. Property transfer tax down a little bit from peak. 2.9 is a fairly conservative number. We feel good about that. And then other taxes are performing fairly well, pretty generic there. It's a combination of things that really drive that number. But all in all, slight uptick year over year, about 3.9% on the general taxation side, $2.9 million of additional structural revenue here. On the appropriation side, this is what I was mentioning to you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I promise I won't have a question on every slide.
No, it's okay.
But can we go back to the last one real quick? I just wanted to ask you, is there any spikes you saw in these numbers, or do you think that these numbers are fairly sustainable going forward?
I think they're fairly sustainable. There is always the concern that, property tax for us performs in a lag, right? Properties sell. They tend to change hands. When they change hands, they tend to be assessed at a higher level than they were prior. The only time that doesn't occur is if there's a volume of sales and the market has dipped. That hasn't happened in a long time here. If for that to happen, we would need sustained depression in market, and we would need significant transactions to actually see it hit the rolls. So we're pretty protected, I think, on property tax. I don't feel too concerned about that. It could oscillate a little bit. We could be off $500,000, but I don't see there being a big 7-figure miss on that. Sales and use tax, based on where we calibrated it, I think it's a fairly conservative number. Again, mid-year, we could come back to you and say, a couple $100,000 here or there. In lieu, pretty fixed, not too concerned. UUT, based on our analysis, I think is a fairly solid number. TOT, I think, still has upside. I really think it has increment. Property transfer tax, that could continue to maybe decline. That could go down to 2.5 million at some point, maybe even 2 million. I remember in the depth of recession, I think we saw that number under 2. I want to say like 1.8, 1.9 million in certain years. So I don't see a lot of risk in these projections. I feel like they're strong. TOT is the one that's still really underperforming here. But that's, better that we know we've got more upside there than to say, hey, we're at our peak and can only go down.
Thank you.
Quick question on the TOT. When do you think that will come back into line with, I guess, expectations?
I'm really hopeful next fiscal year.
Okay.
And I was saying that this last fiscal year, that it would be this fiscal year. Something's going on with the Marine Avenue Hotel properties. One of the sites is maybe generating income for TOT, others are not. We're looking into that, and there could be some corrections there that might ensue over the next couple of months. We're in contact with the property owner. Both sides are kind of scratching their heads on some of the economics with that authority funded reserve that I've talked to you all about. So we're digging in. Eugene and I have been talking, and Wendy. We're looking at it fairly carefully. But as soon as we get to the bottom of that, we feel strong that this time next fiscal year, we should be back into full operation out there. I can't imagine we'd still be in a depressed environment, but I thought we'd be there this year, to be honest. So I'm a little surprised by the number now.
What the major item you have in the other taxes, because that's quite significant, 4.6 million, this is supposed to go up 11%.
Yeah, there is a lot in there. Maybe when you can help me with the big driver in that number. I'm forgetting now what the big upside was.
Sure, a lot of the taxes is the business license taxing in there, which
Which has been steady.
which has been pretty steady, and consistently increasing. There's also some transient taxes, licensing taxes, a miscellaneous of taxes, that go into that. We roll it up just.
May also be a little bit of a reflection of us just getting back to normalcy. Those taxes and revenues were depressed during COVID, and I think are now kind of returning to a normal figure. If we looked at this back over the last 5 years, I'm not sure 4.6 million is some really high number. It's probably done this, and we're kind of getting back to a more typical annualized amount. Yeah. So all in all, good solid number. It's a lot of, it's higher than we've ever had for general taxes in our history. So feel pretty good about it. But it's, something we'll continue to monitor and we'll go from there. On the expenditure side, as I mentioned, this really illustrates, just how much one-time money was really baked into this fiscal year budget and the prior year budget. So it looks like we've shed all these expenses. We really haven't. We've just shed a lot of one-time activities that were funded through that unique amount of ARPA funds and pension debt refinancing proceeds. So we did see a decline in internal service funds year over year. Also a function of budget cuts that occurred back in 2020, 2021. So as those actual expenditures matriculate through the amortization program, always in arrears, costs go down. We book those costs at mid-year. They reflect the reduction. So ISF goes down. And then on the lag, as we restore positions in the various departments that support those functions, they will start to climb back up. So this is a temporary dip. It will eventually go back as we increase wages and we restore previously lost positions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just a couple of notes. I mentioned it, ongoing revenues, if all the decision packages are approved, exceed ongoing expenditures. That's a plus. Annual TOT revenue, still below normal. So as you think about out-year structural balance, I feel good that we still have tax increment out there to align with new spending if we have it. The budget does not propose to touch either our normal 8.33% economic contingency reserve, nor does it propose to touch the recently increased CalPERS reserve that we had discussed a couple of months back. So we have $8.6 million and $7.9 million sitting untouched in reserve, which is good because as this commission knows, we do have a supplemental CalPERS bill coming in the next 2 years. So we'll be prepared potentially to write that check at the time.
A question on that. Do we have any idea what that bill is going to be? Do you keep up with that on an annual basis?
We will know better when we receive our circular in August, I think. And as soon as we get that, we'll make sure that that's on one of your agendas to review. Ballpark estimates are 4 to 5 million, somewhere in that lane. It's predicated on that year, 2 years ago, or 21, 22, when the PERS fund finished at 1.9% as opposed to their expected 7. So, and I don't know how, I know they performed well. I think they performed fairly well in 22, 23. I've heard recently there might be some dips, so there's some concern about forecasting at year close this year. So we might have 2 supplemental bills back to back, hard to say, depending on how they perform. But knowing that money's there and we didn't need to use it for bridge funding this year was a positive. Not to say that there couldn't be other expenses on the horizon that could, demand at least some use of that.
Is your plan to use that if we have a deficit ongoing, to use that CalPERS reserve until it is gone?
It would, if hopefully we don't have an ongoing deficit. It's really going to come down to what decision packages are approved, right? Some of that ongoing revenue is predicated on the new revenue fee increases that are proposed. So if those are adopted, I feel good about where we're at structurally. It would be nice to be able to use that CalPERS fund to write the supplemental checks so we don't have to bury that into our ongoing operations and cost and amortize that expense. That's the goal.
We refund the reserve though, if we were to use it, right? So.
Yeah, we could, and what we have done in the past, right, is we'll draw it down as a bit of a revolving door account. We'll take 3 million out or 2 million out, and then we'll put 3.5 in when we have residual. So we've been pretty careful, but we are leaning in a little bit on salaries and benefits, as I've talked to you about. We're committing ourselves to some additional expenditure there to catch up in market. So, those costs will have structural impacts, but, and I talk about it a little bit in the budget message, but, aside from the TOT that we can get to, I think, with our current properties, we still have Legato coming online here next fiscal year, probably. We'll start to see tax revenues probably accrue to the general fund in maybe 24, 25. When that thing's humming on an annualized basis, easily $1 million a year in new revenue. There will be some additional property tax revenue that'll be generated by that site. We've got Prospect up at South Bay Social District. There could be some renovation up there that would ultimately result in new sales tax income. There's the whole notion of cannabis tax out there still and what could be generated from that. So there are potential revenue drivers that are still available to us. There's been talk. There's a little section in there in the budget about, the conversation around maybe increasing our TOT rate. We're at 12% right now. Could take that to 14%. That generates another $2 million a year potentially in revenue for us.
How does our rate compare with neighboring cities?
Manhattan just went to 14 and we're at 12. So
Santa Monica's 15, I think. Now.
Yeah, they're higher. They're one of the highest.
They've got kind of a structured TOT where they charge people that rent their houses out to, to 17%.
Wow.
So they've got kind of a step.
Well, that's an interesting thought. So they
have a tiered.
So the short-term rentals. Yeah. So there's some upside there. I think, and I've always said to council, and I would say it to you all too, if we do commit, particularly if we were to commit to new borrowing, new debt service for any type of capital fundraising, I would certainly hope that we would also link that expenditure to new increment, new tax revenue, which easily could be new TOT, or maybe it's just us recognizing the revenues in excess of expenditures and saying, okay, we can afford that, through that buffer. So it's positive in that respect. It's positive. So, and of course, the budget is balanced as proposed. And we'll see how all the decision packages shake out when it's all said and done. So with that, Wendy, I don't want to go through all these. I know you've looked at them and you have some questions, but just a couple of the highlights. That we do have some fairly well thought out fee increases. The one that I think is probably the most interesting and potentially controversial is it's described as the paramedic assessment fee there, but it's actually pre-hospital paramedic assessment fee. Pat Butler, to his credit, did a lot of research. A lot of fire agencies in the region, all the big ones, have on the books a paramedic assessment fee that is separate from a transport fee. And what it's meant to do is to recover costs associated with house calls where we expend resources and time administering oxygen, issuing, bandages, checking in on folks. There's quite a bit of expense there. And even in the scenario where you go in, administer an IV, maybe transport somebody, there's significant expense to that process. And while we receive some residual money on the transport itself as a third-party participant with McCormick, we currently don't capture anything on that pre-hospital basis. Most agencies do. What intrigued me the most about this fee is that most agencies have adopted a compassionate billing clause with it. So while billing goes out to everybody, the council and as by policy can choose not to, or ultimately to waive billing for those who do not have insurance that covers the rate. And therefore, you're not penalizing folks nor discouraging folks from making these calls in need. If at the end of the day their insurance coverage doesn't provide for it, we'll ultimately waive the fee. We're finding that the departments that have it, and I'm talking, Burbank, Long Beach, Huntington Beach, the big ones, they all have it. They collected about 60% of billing. The fee we proposed at a little over $300, if it was applied to every house call we go on, would generate about $1.7 million in revenue. We're actually trying to be conservative and say, yeah, we'll probably see maybe $900,000 of that, when it's all said and done. But that compassionate billing clause really spoke to us. It made me, say, hey, look, this money's kind of out there. Medicare, others with Medicare supplemental, the big PPOs, they pay for this. They'll write a check for it. They might discount it a little bit here and there depending on the program, but they'll cover it. And if other communities are scraping this revenue and we're not, we're kind of leaving money on the table in my view. So that's the proposal here. It's a little scary because the idea is, oh my goodness, we're going to start charging for 911 calls. Yes and no, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and it's perfectly legal under the code. It is in a sense a user fee because it's disproportionate who we ultimately provide this service to, right? Fire suppression is for the entire community because the premise of it, as Pat will tell you, is to ensure that if one structure is on fire, there's resources to limit that damage to whatever structure that occurred in, right? You're almost saving the block. That's what fire suppression is meant to really do. Paramedic response, in some cases, is just being called in lieu of an urgent care visit, right? Well, if you go to urgent care, you're going to have a little deductible, you're going to write a little fee, you're going to pay an amount of money to be there. We're kind of in a way becoming effectively your mobile, initial urgent care. So that's why a lot of these cities have put this in place. There's a budget response report that's not yet done that'll be coming that's going to talk about how the collection rate works, how the compassionate billing clause works, but very well-established programs that are deployed by a lot of really reputable fire agencies in Southern California. It's fairly common.
Just because a lot of different places do it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good program. This is to offset the city's costs because, and some cities, probably many cities don't have paramedics as part of their fire departments and they use like private ambulance service for this sort of thing?
Most fire agencies have paramedics. What they may not do is they may not actually manage the transport so that they may not have an ambulance operator program.
Okay. So, and the cities or the fire department's already charging a transport fee.
We receive by way of the program. McCormick charges the transport fee. We receive a small share of that fee under the program. If we were the transport agency, our transport rights, unfortunately, were given back to the county, I don't know what it was, 30, 40 years ago. Every 10 years, there's a competitive process to try to recover those rights. It's kind of like a grant application. We competed a few years back. County awarded it again to McCormick. So McCormick operates, they maintain our transport rights. And by rights, they're able to collect a fee and they're able to collect really the lion's share of that fee. We, as a partnering agency, receive a percentage of that.
And these paramedic assessment fees probably weren't around anywhere like 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Well, they've been around. They started becoming popular in agencies in the early 2000s. We, in fact, as an agency, took a crack at a small version of this, $100 fee back in 2010. It was still novel enough not to really be fully implemented, so we haven't implemented, haven't collected it. But since in the last 10 to 15 years, agencies have figured it out. They've come up with the right billing codes. They've worked with enough medical insurance providers to know that it will be paid. And, while 60% doesn't sound like a great collection rate, 60% in our case would generate almost $1 million a year in revenue.
That's helpful. I like that you've got, what was it, a compassionate clause or something for, that's good. It just, ideally, obviously, it'd be great if it just was covered through the taxes that the citizens pay. It's a slippery slope. I would hate that 20 years from now, we're talking about assessment fees for fire response or safety.
Yeah, fire is not one, that's typically 100% subsidized. This paramedic issue, though, is evolving, right? More and more of what we do is really provide paramedic services. Fires, I've said this to the group before, I think we went on about 7,000 calls last year. Less than 70 of them were fire related. We are a paramedic responding department now, and not every resident draws on those services the same. And,
But you could say the same about all of the city services.
You can.
And to me, this is part of the safety net. So I appreciate what you're saying. It just,
Look, at the end of the day, hey, I'm always going to be looking for revenue. You know that.
I know.
It's, at the end, but it's ultimately a policy call to determine, is this a revenue we really want to pursue? How badly do we want it? It's a lot of money. When I see other neighboring agencies collecting significant revenue, not from their residents directly, but from the residents' insurance that they're already paying for, right? It's no additional cost to them. Insurance is covering this. It's covering this in most agencies. They would cover it in our agency. We just don't try. So when I hear that, that's kind of like us just leaving money on the table. It's, it's built into those premium costs. These providers are assuming, an increasing number of agencies are billing for it. They don't isolate, our Blue Cross insurance or Redondo's not really different than any other Blue Cross insurance in LA County.
I predict there'll be co-pays associated with paramedic assessment fees because insurance companies don't do anything without getting paid.
Well, they might. What's likely to happen, right, is this is going to be one more fee on a very long list of fees if somebody's taken in the hospital, right? You have a bad day, you have a heart attack, you're going to get picked up, you're going to get transported, you're going to get wheeled into the ER, you're going to get operated on, you're going to get care afterwards. There's going to be a bill that's really, really long. Tens of thousands of dollars, right? And that insurance provider is going to look at all those fees and go, okay, ER doc, this, that, cut it back. And at the end of the day, they're going to see little old Redondo Beach, $313, pre-hospital paramedic fee. And they may go, we don't pay $313, we pay $265 for that kind of service. Feels like,
You need the paramedics, that's going to be the least of your worries is a couple $100.
Well, right. That's, I think, kind of the point, right? I mean, if you're getting transported into the hospital on an emergency basis, there's other expenditures that can occur that, the medical group's going to be looking at.
As I recall, one of the big differences is for the agency that actually does the transport, they come up with a long bill and only one of those line items is transport. That's the cost of the vehicle going to the hospital. But they get to charge for IVs and bandages and sheets and all the other supplies that they use. As a paramedic unit that's just following that ambulance, we don't get to bill for that.
And we may have already administered the IV before they even got into the transport vehicle. It may have been our IV bag that they're billing for.
This is one of the smartest revenue moves I think this city has done in a while. And in the decision package, I think it points out the last time this was visited was in 2013. So my real question is, why does it take 10 years to review revenue items like this? And what others do we have that are buried elsewhere in the budget that need to be reviewed?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question. And usually this is a department kind of case-by-case basis, right? And in this case, I applaud Pat, did the deep dive, made the proposal. I said, well, shoot, I like the sound of that. As I push back, okay, let's be smart. We're not going to get 100% if we bill it. What's the appropriate collection rate? What's the appropriate fee? What's going to be acceptable ultimately as a line item to these insurance providers. Well, dig around, 300, 350, some charge 450, 600. What's the going insurance rate? That's sort of the important number. We settled on 313. And once I heard about the compassionate billing clause, I thought, well, that really takes out the big issue in my view, which is you're ultimately being punitive on somebody in the community who doesn't have proper coverage and is all of a sudden seeing this bill and going, well, wait a minute, I wouldn't have called if I had known, you're going to charge me this, but they'll get a bill, and if it doesn't get covered by insurance, it'll eventually get waived. That's the way the program works. So once you kind of check all those boxes, I thought, well, it's a pretty good idea. So
Once upon a time in LA County, when the program was first growing, they had a thing called the Emergency Aid Program, where every time a paramedic unit rolled on a call, if it was a dry run, if they saw a patient, but the patient didn't go to the hospital, they wrote up a little ticket and the county funded a certain portion of that. I don't think that exists anymore.
yeah. Yeah. Look, there's expenses in rolling to call. And, I hate to say this, some of our calls are calls that shouldn't be made. Or calls that would be better served going to an urgent care or the like. And as it stands, we roll out, we treat everybody the same. There's no judgment. It is what it is. But if I know there's an insurance provider behind that, that our residents already paying into, has got a premium coverage for, that covers that cost, that doesn't feel quite as bad as asking our residents to come out of pocket for it. So, for what it's worth. Anyway, that's one of the more, I'll use the word provocative decision packages in the budget this year, but I really think it's worth talking about. There's quite a few reorganizations that are proposed in here, particularly in our community services department, really looking at positions and need and service, trying to be conservative in what we're proposing to fill gaps in service. We're struggling to oversee both the performing and public art programs, as well as our historical museum activities on the cultural side of our community services department. We have limited resources there. We haven't restaffed to pre-pandemic levels. There's a proposal to add a position to help create bandwidth for our cultural arts manager that can support the public art component of what he's in charge of, as well as the historical museum. There's some additional changes to retain very key personnel in our recreation services division and administrative side of the community services department. We back in my day in community services, we had, I want to say, 7 managers in the department, maybe 8. And we're down to right now effectively 2. And we struggle with that. Recreation programs don't receive as much oversight as I think they should have. Cultural programs, we just are limited on how many special projects we can execute. So we've got some proposals in here that I think are pretty inexpensive relatively to add some true depth to our delivery of service. Also, and in that department, backed by new revenue, really backed by revenue. So I think some good efforts there. You'll see those. I mentioned the $1.8 million I'm proposing to set aside for salary and benefit increases. We've got 4 miscellaneous bargaining groups that are coming due this fiscal year. Rather than wait for that shoe to drop, try to get out in front of it, commit to the employees, show that we are trying to bring as best we can. This 1.8 million won't bring everybody to market. That's a fact, but it sure will help get us, a step closer. And like I said, want to show that investment as a policy decision. The clerk's office is inundated with Public Records Act requests. I've never seen the volume that we see today. It has been weaponized. I think candidly, this is a sidebar. I think the law is providing too much access in this regard. It's particularly with all the other information that's readily available through website and the online portals. The amount of time our clerk's office and our city attorney's office spend assessing these requests, redacting information that isn't disclosable, and then getting these documents out, it's become effectively a 2 full-time job requirement. And it's just been mandated under law. We have no choice. Eleanor's really suffering as a result of that. So there's a proposal in here to add another staff member to her shop, give her some additional strength and administrative support. I think an analyst in her office will help add depth and some additional support for those activities.
Is there a typical type client in this change or increase that you can identify?
No, I think it's more a reflection of politics in a social media age. If I had to try to just put a term of art on it, it's just, there is just a hyper demand for information, relevance. There's a lot more, I think, neighbor to neighbor, political disputes that generate interest and aggravation and response. And, Public Records Act is, I'm going to go in there and find out what are all these things you're saying to one another in your emails. Well, most of the stuff that gets generated is just business, regular old vanilla, boring stuff, but it takes a lot of time to go to every department that might be involved and say, well, do you have any documents pertaining to this issue? Do you have, and and then you got to assemble it, you got to get it out. It's time consuming. I just think it's kind of the age that we're in.
Having done a couple of records requests myself recently, I'm wondering, I know we're doing work on the website, we're doing other IT work. One of the things that I realized is all the documents that I got back were scanned PDF documents.
Right.
Instead of somebody generating them directly to PDF so that they're intelligent documents, which means that a clerk someplace has to look at every document and read it rather than just being able to do searches on it. Is there anything being done in terms of document control and changing that?
Well, more importantly, on the website for residents to directly search information that's already available, that is definitely part of the website upgrade. Okay. So the search engine that's coming with our new website is going to allow you to go in there, type, scatter, and pull documentation from a variety of sources rather than, okay, well, you're in the wrong portal. You didn't go to the agenda section or the contract record section. It's an ability to pull from all. Right now, what's happening is, Laura and Eleanor's staff is really our search engine. Okay, well, I got to go back through all the resolutions and it's a pain. So I think we'll see some relief once the website's up and running, but there is a sensitivity to some of the other requests that are coming that are requiring somebody to actually analyze what's been asked for, what isn't disclosable publicly. There's back and forth with the attorney's office. It's not just as easy as all this gets shipped out. So it's taking more thought and it's taking a little bit more analytical horsepower to really provide the right material.
Well, there's no doubt it takes more people. And even when we get the new website up, it still means that you need to have a documentarian to
get it
create all those rules.
Yep.
So
to help archive it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's not an easy task, and it does take people, so that's probably a good move.
Yeah, that's the recommendation. And plus Eleanor, to her credit, they're running multiple elections a year. I mean, the clerk's office has been pretty busy. So trying to help there. We always describe our annual IT equipment replacement. This year, there's a DP on that. Emergency communications,
Can we stop at DP 17 and 18?
Sure.
IT equipment replacements that you just touched on.
Yep.
There's $192,000 getting plugged into other categories for IT equipment replacement, and then an additional $55,000 one time and $55,000 ongoing for laser printers. Why is this not like part of the ongoing budget? How is this a surprise amount?
It is. So it's not a surprise.
Okay.
So it's a great question because we probably could do this differently where we don't do a decision package for this work. We've kind of taken it a step further to make it a transparent appropriation. So the fund, the IT equipment replacement fund, has received annual revenues and allocations to replace this equipment.
Okay.
It sits in fund balance, but by charter, it's not appropriated until this action is taken.
Okay.
So we've planned for all these expenses. There's resource for it, but we've hit effectively we've added another layer of transparency to say, well, this is what we're replacing this fiscal year. Even though money's been set aside for these items for years, we're now saying we need a $192,000 appropriation. We were planning to replace items A through E, and the cost is $192,000. We're pulling from the existing resources.
Well, I like the table that you created this time. I don't recall seeing this before. It makes it much clearer and easier to see where things are going and easier to sort things out in your head. I would hate to make it more complicated. But at the same time, it seems like there should be a way of saying, this is what our historic trend is, or this is what this is what we've been spending on this,
Sure.
and this is the incremental new allocation, or some way to track,
Yeah.
are we changing things?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we do, and there's a budget response report that will answer some of these questions. So when you get a chance, I forget the number on it. Oh, number 13. So question that we raise every year, this will probably drop probably drop tomorrow. How does the city's information technology equipment replacement program work? And what equipment is recommended for replacement in fiscal year 23-24? So keep an eye out for 13. It should provide that description for you. But these are planned purchases. It feels like a new expense that we're adding to the budget. We're adding to it, but it's a planned activity, and we're not adding general fund resources to it. We're pulling it from our fund balance in the IT replacement fund and actually appropriating it for this expense. The ongoing charges are generated through the day-to-day allocations to the IT department, and then what we estimate to be the future cost of replacement to be. So that's that ISF formula where we set that annual allocation by department aside. So every department that has IT equipment, whatever form or fashion it takes, is allocated a charge through our internal service fund program for those expenses on an amortized basis.
So I guess that's a similar case with items 21 and 22 and 25 through 27?
Yes, it is, precisely. We do the same thing in the Emergency Communications Fund, which I should point out is much more than just dispatch equipment. Emergency Communications Fund includes all of our radios, both fire, police, public works, all associated costs and radio equipment in our rolling apparatus, our police patrol vehicles, et cetera. In fact, we've got a BRR on that. You'll be interested in this, I know, knowing your background. It'll be, probably will drop next week. BRR number 61. What items are included in the Emergency Equipment Communications Fund, and what is the estimated replacement cost for these items? So kind of helping council, one of the questions they had at Tuesday's, God, feels like last week, Tuesday's hearing, what is in the fund? What are these emergency items? There's a sense that is it just the CAD RMS systems and our dispatch portals for answering 911 calls? It's much broader than that, because there's about $7 million sitting in that fund, and the council thought, wow, that's a lot of money. There are a lot of items that are ultimately funded through that fund, and it's important that there's money set aside for their replacement. So
But there's more that comes out of that fund than just hardware and software.
there is.
There are
Operating
personnel
costs are also charged to that location.
So it's all the dispatchers that are sitting in dispatch.
Yep, they're all in there. That's all part of it. Yeah. So I think, good questions, and these internal service fund programs are always, a curiosity, and for good reason, I think. And we're trying to be as transparent about how we operate them as we can.
Well, I was curious about 20 and 21. 20 is, once again, we're supporting the legacy CAD system as we're transitioning to the new system. It seems to me I've heard that every year for about the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm wondering when that's going to end.
I'm told it's soon.
It's a small number. It's
Small number.
$10,000.
It's dwindling. It's getting less.
And supposedly the reason that we went to the new system is because the old system was beyond repair and needed to be thrown away.
Yep.
So
This number is dwindling, which is good. As I've been told, we are at times when we have legacy records questions where we're trying to pull old data, it's not as easy for Mark 43 to go back into that old system and pull that information out in a digestible way. What this does is allows us effectively access to that material and allows us to mine it on a continual basis. I think at some point we will have cut all of that material over into a digestible database. That's what I believe this is doing. But yes, that legacy information is very important, as you know, and I don't disagree with you. I was hopeful that we were out of the legacy game a while ago as well.
the CAD or a new system ongoing costs, it seems to me, I'm looking at your table here and it says $62,000 this year for ongoing costs on the new system.
Yep.
Is that over and above what had been budgeted for years under the old system? Or-
Yes, I believe so. Yes, it is getting more expensive to system subscriptions, costs associated with software maintenance, et cetera, are getting more expensive. And I believe this is necessary to support that expense.
My understanding of the new system is it was a cloud-based service. So it's subscription per user. And this sounds like an awful big jump because we certainly haven't had 61,000 new police users.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what the current total annualized CAD RMS system cost is. I think it's several $100,000 a year. So I don't know if 62,000 on a percentage basis is a significant bump, but I do know it's an increasing expense. I don't know if I couldn't tell you specifically, it's software related or what it might be, but it is going up.
Just sounded like an awful big jump.
Yeah, and I fair question, and one that I asked the same. The number though is known to us based on what we're projecting for next year's fees.
And 25, 26, and 27, it seems like we're finally getting a handle on what it really costs to run our fire department.
We are investing in the equipment I believe we need to invest in, and I have great confidence in our understanding of what exactly that equipment should be and what we should be prioritizing in those replacement efforts, and what you see in this proposed budget incorporates that.
Yeah, it just, the one that surprises me there is 26, new firefighter outfitting. It seems like we would know that whenever we hire a new firefighter, we've got to equip them.
We do.
And the total cost should be already in the budget as part of ongoing.
We've been a little austere about that. So what we've done is, we've got a little bit of money in there, anticipating a couple of new hires a year. We ebb and flow a little bit more with a bit of a bigger swing than that. So we have been, we now predict we're gonna have 8, let's get 100,000 in there. At some point, I'd like us to just be on a smooth, our core budget has $40,000 in it, and we've got, 3 to 4 each year. It just hasn't been that way of late. So I completely agree with you. Ideally, we would get to that point.
Mike, does that include the second set?
It does. So new firefighter outfitting includes everything they need, from brass to turnouts to secondary turnouts and all that. We are replacing some older secondary turnouts now in this budget that are the result of new standards as it pertains to life and wear and smoke damage. There's some new, cancer markers that are concerning.
So we had secondary turnouts before,
Yes.
but this is,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Yeah, this is so when somebody new comes on board, they're getting everything from the whites to the day-to-days to the, across the board.
Good.
Mike, you have 20 out of 77 decision packages here. Is it possible to prioritize them based on what the impact will be on the total budget?
Well, what I've done is, each of these decision packages falls into one of our decision criteria, right? We have 7 decision criteria that we use to evaluate their efficacy, and you can see it on page 4 of the city manager's message. Would the decision package sustain or improve revenue to the city? Well, right there for me, that's priority number 1, right? Typically, not always well received, but definitely one of our priorities. Does the decision package restore department positions and operating budgets lost during prior year reductions? We've added that because we've done so much cutting. Most of the time when I see service problems or deficiencies in performance or quality, it's in the departments and it's in the areas where we have made really significant cuts. So right there, if I know we're already going in shorthanded and I'm starting to see deficiency in performance, I got to look at that and say, we need to shore that up. We need to add more resource because we're just not performing there. The next one, of course, comply with mandates or fund unavoidable costs for basic service. If a utility company comes to us and says, hey, Mike, Cal Water, we went up to the PUC and water's going up 12%. There's no avoiding that, right? We've cut to the bone. We can conserve water, but at the end of it, that's an unavoidable cost. If the state says, Mike, your city's going to need to evaluate 15 new housing bills, and you're going to need to perform annual reports, telling us the following things, and the only department that can provide that service is the planning department, I got to figure out a way to support that now mandated obligation, right? Or have all of our building communities suffer while all we're doing is focusing on legislation, right? Does it protect the health and safety and quality of life of the public? It used to be just public health and safety. We used to say, okay, is it safety related? Okay, that's always a priority. What I've noticed in our community over the last few years is quality of life, in some instances, for some of our surveyed residents is as important as basic public safety services, right? And we are fortunate enough to live in a community where we can look at quality of life issues. And so that's now part of our decision criteria. Does the decision package improve organizational efficiency and effectiveness? Is it something that's going to let us put out more product or a higher quality product without expending a lot of resources, right? Allowing us to become a better performer. Does the decision package support priority objectives suggested by city commissions or members of the public during the budget input process or throughout the course of the year? Some of the decision, that's a whole new category out of that last year to the budget, things that you have suggested in the past. This year doesn't have as many of them because there's a lot of overlap. Sometimes a decision package is going to do all three of these things, right? It's been suggested by the commission, it's been suggested by me, it's been suggested by the fire chief. It's going to fall into one of these categories. So but that's one that I felt was important to add in response and in valuing the input I received from you all and your fellow commissioners. And then the last one, does it fill a gap in service or meet new service demands? And that's kind of the last one on the list, but it tends to be things that we're struggling with, things that we need to do. You know, an example of a decision package that is in that category is excuse me, funding the legal costs associated with us pursuing the AAS bankruptcy case, right? Potentially the biggest issue we got going in the community, depending on the outcome of that process, right? There's no money in the budget for that sort of proactive legal review. We have money built into the core budget for reacting to litigation and claims and providing general counsel for basic business. But pursuing a matter like this is unique. We got to set money aside to do it. So that's a gap in service, or it's meeting a new service demand that we think is important in the community. So these criterion it's not willy-nilly. It's not something I'm just, kind of throwing out there. Department heads going, hey, Mike, I really need this. Well, let's throw it in there. Yeah, what the heck? There's a lot of thought that goes into each of these packages. There's a lot of refinement. There's a lot of cutting. And there's a lot of skinnying up and reformatting. Well, so you want a new body here. Well, can we do it with a reclassification? Could we add those duties to this position if it were given more responsibility and higher pay? So we really try to scrutinize these things to make sure they're as efficient as they can be and they perform within the scope of our budget.
Yeah, there are a lot of items which are beyond our control, or some may be insignificant compared to some other ones, but what are the top 10 that will impact the budget much more than some of the other packages? So we don't have to go through each and every line item.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're all important in my view. And
It's
I
not
know,
important, it's just the total dollar impact.
oh yeah, for you all to say, how do I focus my review? Well, I mean, obviously the three big revenue ones at the beginning of the concept are major drivers. I mean, those things account for potentially $1.7 million of ongoing funding. Those are big decision packages. We don't get those, we got a different budget, right? If you point to the kind of the new ongoing costs, you're going to see the senior planner position, the community development department. I was speaking to you about the new housing mandates. They have occupied so much of our forward planning time. We're in some cases not as responsive at the counter as I think we should be to our building community, to our residents. There's a need there. That's a big expense, $170,000 a year. That's not one to be taken lightly.
Got a quick question on that one.
Yeah.
The real estate kind of surveys that I've been reading indicate that from a macro standpoint, our SMSA for LA and Long Beach, we're going to have a 12% reduction in real estate activity.
Yep.
During this 23-24. Probably as a result of the pandemic, the new plan requests for reviews and probably we're down during that period. We've got a catch-up period.
Yep.
And it looks like we're heading into a real estate decline in terms of activity.
Yep.
So wouldn't those things combined raise the question about the need for an additional person to do the approval of the
Yeah,
plan?
no, fair question. And we've been looking at the same trend lines. And I will tell you, honestly, in my history here, 17-year history, I feel like every time we finally catch up to staffing in our building and planning divisions, just what you're describing is happening. And then all of a sudden next year, oh boy, there just isn't as much work to do. But I will tell you, with all of the advanced planning initiatives that the city council has on our strategic plan priority list, all the new mandates we're getting from the state in terms of annualized reporting and deciphering the changes, I think I've vented to you all before, they're passing 200-300 bills a year. They used to pass 5. Though every one of those bills potentially forces us to digest it and make code changes that react and respond to it. That takes hours and hours and hours of analysis work to figure out what that means to us. So while I do believe, and I agree with you, I think counter review requests will begin to dip next year. I kind of welcome that, to be honest, because I think we're kind of maxed, redlined out right now. There's enough strategic and advanced planning work to do, specifically in planning, where we'll be busy regardless. So I've thought about that, but I think that's why I don't have a building position for you this year, because building isn't as impacted by those state mandates as planning is on an advanced basis. But candidly, building could use help because they are, to your point, we've got 300 active permits a day. 300. Now, I don't mean that we get 300 new each day, but every day our building and planning staff are dealing with 300 active permits, questions from contractors, questions from homeowners, complaints from neighboring homeowners. The department is slammed right now. And I agree. I think that's an outgrowth of the pandemic and the pent-up demand. And we have a well-capitalized community. I thought we'd already start to see a dip with the cost of equity lines of credit and the like. Our community's just blowing through that. They're just writing big old checks and building.
And also the increase by the Fed here since March, double the interest rate.
Double the interest rate. So you go out and get a HELOC.
We're going to see some slowing down on
I would think there's
transfer tax and all of those kinds of things.
So I think so. So if that said, I think there's enough in the log. There's still enough on the planning side, on the advanced planning basis. We're still in the middle of a general plan update. We still got aviation Artesia corridor area changes. We're modifying parking regulations. We're implementing residential design standards. We've got so much going in that shop. I think this position really won't be at the counter. It will be dealing with these advanced planning issues. So
thank you.
Hence the recommendation, really. Yeah. Appreciate the question, though.
Got a question. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too far or not, but on decision package number 39, that annual vehicle replacement.
Yep.
I've been spending some time looking at some case studies of a lot of cities that have implemented electric
vehicles,
fleets. Yeah, electric fleets. And the preponderance of information is that there's a savings in operational costs.
Yeah.
And also certainly a kindness to the environment and the climate change issues. And there's savings that are currently being made in the case studies that I've been looking at. And I'm wondering here, as part of this decision package, it says that the city council the staff will continue to explore the possibilities of buying low emission vehicles when operationally and financially feasible. Well, how is that exactly?
So
if it's currently financially and operationally feasible, why don't we do something about a pilot program and get something moving along those lines?
I think for us, and this is, we had a little bit of a discussion Tuesday night with the council. We went through the download on the Vehicle Replacement Fund program and all the units that we have in there, 220 units in our fund. That includes like 21 generators, so roughly 200 vehicles. You go across that list, there's only like 6 sedans that are for general purposes. Everything in there it's fire apparatus, it's police patrol, it's SIU, it's predominantly, I think 126 of the 220 pieces of equipment are public works related. And right now, there just is not electric inventory for those specialty equipment. I think if I'm a big city of Los Angeles or LA County, or I've got Long Beach or Anaheim, and I've got 1,000, pool vehicles for building inspectors and permit techs, and then yeah,
Just as an example, not to burden you with this, but South Pasadena is just buying 10 electric police cars. And that would be the highest, I would think, demand type vehicle.
it is. I
after a
find that
year of
interesting.
case study.
I'd be curious to know what they're buying.
Tesla.
Are they doing the Model S?
I've got it
So
here.
so Palo Alto did that. Palo Alto went with the Tesla Model S, and I've heard from a police performance standpoint, there were some concerns about that at the time. That's the one area that I've seen other agencies invest in some tech, and I've heard questions. I have no doubt it's great for the environment and all of those things, no question. A Model S is an expensive vehicle, and then when you add the upfitting, you're at about at that point, you're probably at about $120,000 per.
Well, they say they've got grants and they've covered the costs for it, so and South Pasadena doesn't look
Yeah,
like.
that's an interesting question.
And here-
I will commit
Here's
to
a,
looking
here's
into
a
that.
periodical from a police organization talking about electrification of police cars, which I will give you.
Please do, and I will be sure to share that with Joe. And
Thank
we
you.
will- Yeah. I've been intrigued by it. When Palo Alto did it, it was like, oh, of course, it's Palo Alto. They're Silicon Valley. It's flashy. They got the resources, If that is proving to be cost effective, yeah, it's intriguing to me. I wonder about the operational performance, how they're
Let's
preferring it.
take a look at some of those case studies and
Yeah, I
see
think
what-
it's-
see
I
what's
appreciate the
going on.
comment. We'll do
Thanks,
that.
thank you.
We'll do that.
There are a lot of pilot projects like that going on, and a lot of them are grant funded out of the feds. To just buy them out of our city budget, I don't know that it's ready for prime time
Well, if
yet.
they're getting grants, why can't we get
Well,
grants?
you've got the city of LA has an electric fire truck, and the jury's still out on that one. And Dodge announced a few months ago that this is the last year they're going to produce a gas-powered Dodge Charger, which was one of the most popular police vehicles in the country. And international chiefs of police sent them a letter and said, well, that's the last time you're going to sell a car to the police service. So
Well, maybe Tesla will be in a position to be doing that.
Yeah.
And I think I just read something also that says LA City's buying 100 more electric cars. for
Yeah,
their-
I think it's intriguing. I really do. I would love to see our 6 pool vehicles go to some type of a Model 3 or an electric Ford or whatever. I think it'd be great. I just know the real meat of our expenditures are in heavy duty trucks and fire engines, and they're just, I'd love to go out and buy the Ford Lightning. Our public works guys would love that. You're online for 3 years. So where I think most of our expenditures are in equipment where the electric market isn't quite there yet. But that's not to say, and that's not to diminish, I think the incitement for that. I'd love to see us be electric and anywhere we could be. I'd love for us to be there.
Well, we also had the conversation a couple of years ago when we first started moving down the road of looking at electrics in our city, that selecting the right electric to replace the vehicle that's coming out of service in terms of range and size and speed and carrying capacity and all those things, that was becoming a challenge. So unless we have a good way to assess what we're looking for, it's really hard to determine, do you need a Tesla Model S or do you need a Prius? And that's something, that's going to be a challenge for our department heads too.
Yeah, it's coming. I mean, I'm a proud owner of at least one electric vehicle. I did maintain one gas vehicle. Just to make sure. That's not bad. But I'm just, those long road trips, I don't like the range anxiety that comes. But I think there's incredible merit to it. I mean, gosh, it's much more fun to drive an electric car than it is a gas car, candidly. But yes, but I would love to look at that. I'd love for you to share those studies. We'll pass it along. It's something we're always analyzing.
My big question about the vehicle replacement fund is, in addition to the $2.5 million to replace the vehicles,
Yep.
what else is there that's going to have to go into these vehicles to outfit them once we buy them?
Well, the good news is our replacement cycle now is including upfitting. So this cost, for the most part, is fully loaded. Not always if we're on the bleeding edge of new technology and we're making changes in the cars. But anytime we're buying a truck or public works apparatus, there's not a ton of upfitting for us. It's racks. It's stuff that we have a pretty good sense of cost on. Where it gets a little bit more questionable sometimes is we're buying a new police vehicle, the latest and greatest in connectivity to and all the communications equipment and the like. We've got a pretty good number in there for it. Sometimes it comes a little short. What's killing us right now is just, we've got an estimate for cost. You go out to market, you'll do a bulk rate purchase, the vendor will give you a rate, and then 4 months later, a few days before delivery, they tell you, we can't deliver. And then you're waiting again, and then you go back out, and then you bid it again, and then you're up another 10%. It's been a nightmare, an absolute nightmare buying vehicles the last 2 years.
So you brought up police cars and radios and things like that. Radios normally get purchased out of the Emergency Communications Fund.
They do. Those are handhelds. The built-in apparatus, depending on the portals and how they're fitted to the car, sometimes fall into the vehicle fund. It just depends on the piece of equipment.
And what kind of a life expectancy do we put on those electronics?
It's at least as long as the car.
Well, I should hope so, because typically the manufacturers will give you a 7-year warranty.
Yeah. It used to
Cars are
be.
usually going out in 3 or 4.
Yeah, our patrol cars, we try to replace every 4 years. In practice, by the time we get them deployed, it's more like 5. It used to be we would pick up old radio equipment, old communication equipment, put it in the new one. Given delays and replacements, I'm not sure that's occurring, but I think whenever we can, we do. That would be my answer. I just couldn't tell you with specifics. Yes, sir.
Mike, what about vehicles that we retire? Where do we get any type of anything for them? Or are they donated? Or where do we see?
Yeah, we do. We've done a little bit of everything. We've donated sister city organizations. We've given to maybe not-for-profits that are providing service for us for a vehicle that we might have used as an example. We used to have a very robust auction program. We would go down to Ken Porter, I forget the name, I think it's Ken Porter, and we put it up to auction, we'd sell it, all that money that we recoup, it could be $4,000, $10,000, $6,000, would go back into the fund. Lately we've been running these things to the ragged edge. And departments have been hesitant to let go of vehicles, so we're holding over more vehicles, waiting on the new ones, because delivery is not predictable right now. It's been bad.
Over on Gertruda, we've got a full fire engine, right, that's sitting there.
Yeah, we maintain a couple of reserve engines. We had one have a bit of an electrical wiring issue that it caused us some problems. Our reserve apparatus in some instances it's pretty long in the tooth. That's one of the issues we flagged as needing some correction. We took advantage recently. You might have tracked this. We bought a new engine from Long Beach. Had spec'd out a bunch of engines, ordered them, and they were getting prepared and ready to be delivered. And then Long Beach changed their specs and went with another vendor. Well, the former bid then was kind of open, and they had these things outfitted. We jumped and grabbed one just out of desperation, even though it was ahead of schedule for us. And then ultimately, we've got an engine coming in earlier than normal. The reason for that is because we're going to now put our oldest frontline engine, which I think is a 215 Pierce, and actually put that into reserve status. So we've got a good quality backup engine that's still fully operable, as compared to something now that might be 20 years old, 21 years old or more. So we've got to watch that reserve. Part of the delay, when we've extended the life of our vehicles through policy or just delay in delivery, it means our reserve apparatus is getting that much more extended as well. So there's a real balance there that has to occur. So to answer your question, we haven't taken as much to auction of late because we haven't recycled as many vehicles. I think we're on the precipice of actually spitting out quite a few. I've been told that we've got a lot of public works trucks waiting to get deployed in the field, so we might be taking some to auction here fairly soon. But typically, our first thing is to go sell it, get as much money as we can for it.
Sure. We're not just storing vehicles that are retired.
No, we don't have the space.
Right.
It's not space. Yeah. It's an ongoing issue, and you'll notice in here, there's actually a recommendation, not just for the $2.6 million of new fiscal year expenses, but the $900, I think it's $20,000 of money that we appropriated this year. You recall, we did this last year too. Rather than wait for year end in the fall to carry over money and reappropriate so it can be available, we're so concerned about missing a window of acquisition that our staff want to ensure that funding is available come July 1st in case a dealer comes through and says, I can get you those 10 vehicles in August. So we got to have the money and have the ability to write the check right now. So we're basically advancing the carryover 4 or 5 months. So we're prepared to make that purchase. We're that desperate right now. It's crazy.
Must be a lot of municipalities already.
Everybody is in this boat. Everybody is people are irate with Pat and the fire department for jumping on that vehicle. They're like, man, I'll buy that from you we could probably flip that thing for, make $500,000 if we wanted to. I mean, people are that desperate right now. So, yeah, we get in the car sale business, that'd be
Should
interesting.
have bought two and sold one.
Seriously. It's pretty intense right now. Well, I don't know if you want me to go through all of these. I mean, we've kind of touched on a few of them. It'd probably better just let you tell me what's of interest to you as you read it. Happy to provide any depth on these items that you'd like. And you can keep looking, and I've got a few more slides here. I'm not going anywhere too. So, if you want to hear Jesse's presentation and, circle back to me, we can do that too.
I like that we're increasing crossing guard compensation because that should provide us with more crossing guards so that we don't have police officers out there.
Redirecting, that's really, yeah, you got the
That's
gist.
money well spent.
It's crazy, as Joe and I reflected on expenses, we spent a little under $200,000 a year on the crossing guard program 5 years ago. We're up now between contract providers and needing to increase pay to keep up with, minimum wage and the like. One slide, yeah, I'll let Jesse come in, that's fine. I can spitball that other comment.
I can get you.
But the one thing though that I think is really important in that is we're now at about $440,000 to cover contract, all the spots that the council's committed to. We have 25 locations in the city. And what we've said is it's a painful increase, but if we're gonna tell the community we're gonna guard those 25 locations, we gotta invest in the part-time and contract work we need to your point, so we don't have our limited motor patrol officer or an MSO or code enforcement officer that otherwise should be looking at some other issue standing on a corner. But it's, so it's an essential expense, but it's kind of a painful one, candidly. There's been some talk about pursuing, maybe see if the district might help subsidize some of that effort too, given that it's gone up in price. So, we're going to generally, sort of gently ask them for that. We'll see how that goes.
What slide would you like?
Oh yeah, the next slide, sure. And feel free, anytime you guys want to ask more decision. One thing I wanted to point out before Jesse came up, because he'll give you the guts in this, but this is something we're really proud of. We are going to spend almost $24 million in this fiscal year on capital. And I can tell you, having been around when we were back in my public works days and community service, there were years when we might only spend 8 or 10. We're going to complete 20 projects and design and or award construction contracts to another 41 projects.
That's great.
In a single fiscal year. That is unbelievably good for us. And finally, when you look at $89 million of total projects, 130 projects over a 5-year period, to see execution like that, oh, hey, now we're executing and spending at a rate that meets that 5-year kind of amortization. So really kudos to Public Works. It's a really nice thing to report. It's been a bugaboo for everybody, up here. This is great to see this kind of performance out of our staff. Now, next year we'll dip, next year we'll be back in design mode, probably not executing quite as many. But it's pretty exciting.
And our public works team oversees all 41 of these projects going on. All
They do. So, Ted, Andy, Jesse's our capital projects manager. We've got commission be part of this. We've added senior associate engineers. We've, tried. One of the positions in here we're actually recommending is a reclassification of our transportation engineer into more of a senior transportation kind of associate engineer, principal engineer level. We've had a heck of a time recruiting. You might remember Gene Kim, former traffic engineer. We haven't had a full-time traffic engineer since Gene left. We have tried multiple times to recruit in that space. It's very competitive. And we're hoping that this will incentivize a stronger candidate pool. But outside of that particular division in engineering, we're staffed in every other construction management and design area, and it's showing in our performance. Plus, we're relying very heavily on standby consultants who help supplement our pre-design and design work product. So, it's and they get help from the operating departments. I mean, waterfront, community services, police, fire, they're kind of bird dogging some of these projects too, trying to push them along. So Anyway, I think, is there another slide, or is that kind of it? Maybe Jesse's up? No, calendar, just to give you a heads up on where we're at. So had the introduction on the 16th, which is when the delivery of the budget occurred. Had our first kind of real hearing on the 30th, second one on the 7th. You were all teed up to be at your regular meeting in June, so we're here tonight with you, Harbor Commission Monday, another hearing with council on the 13th, Planning Commission on the 15th, and adoption on the 20th. So that's the schedule.
So adoption will take place before our next meeting. So anything that we want
Yeah, you need
council
to
to be aware
formulate
of,
your
we need to
advice
put
tonight.
something together.
Or task somebody, give general guidance to a small subcommittee to help draft the letter and submit it. You've done that in the past too, but as a collective, you need to kind of counsel on what that should be. It shouldn't be one individual author's impressions, right? On behalf of the commission, so. Is that it? Yeah, that's, discuss tonight, provide recommendations to council. That's really the goal. And with that, Jesse? I'll let Jesse,
Thanks,
I'm going
Mike.
to step away just a second while Jesse presents. I'm going to go do some more work in the back, but as soon as he starts wrapping up, I'll be back out here to answer any questions, okay? I'll be gone long.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jesse Ray is CIP Manager for the record. I'll be presenting on the proposed 5-year CIP program and the recommended appropriations for the upcoming fiscal year 23-24. So first, a recap of where we are right now. Currently, we have 125 CIP projects, all in different phases from programmed, pre-design, design, procurement, or construction, totaling an estimated $100 million. This includes carryover funding, as well as appropriations that were made during fiscal year 22-23. Wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that have occurred during this current fiscal year. You'll see a citywide residential street rehab. This was a roughly $5 million project. The construction has wrapped up. We're just going through some punch list items right now, and that should be formally accepted as complete in the next month or so. The curb ramp improvement project finished, wrapped up in the first quarter of fiscal year 22-23. That addresses a lot of our ADA mandates that are required. Traffic calming, citywide pedestrian enhancements. This is an ongoing CIP. This year, we had about 12 radar feedback signs that were purchased, installed in various sections of the city. We also added bulb outs for pedestrian safety at South Elena, Avenue I, and the Riviera Village, as well as the Dow Johnson neighborhood. And we just recently added a lighted crosswalk at Redondo Beach Avenue by Northrop Grumman for safety there that was requested by the city council. The Inglewood MBB intersection, to the delight of a lot of people that use that intersection, that southbound right turn lane has been completed, that phase 1. We're currently in design for phase 2, which is upgrades to the controllers and the signals at that intersection as well. The next 3 deal with the pier, pad 10, Perry Park skate park installation. I'm sure you have all gone down to the skate park down at the pier. I think that's really added some vibrancy down there. It's been a very, while not the largest in dollar figure, I think it's been a very well-received project down there with the community. That has been wrapped up, accepted as complete. It just occurred on Tuesday. The last element is a mural that the King's Foundation donated about $25,000 that will be installed there in the upcoming months, working with some local public arts muralist to install.
Who it is?
That process is still underway. They have not decided on who the muralist. It might be a combination muralist. That's being led by the community services. Along with that is the harbor railing project that we've replaced most of the rails down there. A lot of them were rusted out, and we've installed new railings along the skate park. And the pier light fixtures that have been replaced during the first quarter of last year as well. I think all these 3 projects combined have really added some much needed TLC down there and have really added some vibrancy, like I said, to the harbor and the pier. Kind of touching on some more highlights, Transit Center, That was completed in January, phase 1. It is now fully operational. We are wrapping up phase 2, hopefully this month, which was the widening at the Kingsdale Avenue widening right there by the Galleria where the old transit center is. Those street improvements should be completed in the next day, hopefully this week. And landscaping elements are to follow. Alta Vista Pump Station, this is a new sewer pump station. While not people don't think of sewer as when they think of things they want to see, but they're vital to the city's infrastructure. So that pump station and $3.5 million, that is completed. It will go to council for accepted as complete in the next couple of weeks. Beryl Street resurfacing drainage. This was from Prospect to Flagler. That section, that's been completed. That was accepted as complete on Tuesday as well. And there's some continuity with the residential rehab. As you see the repavement, new added bicycle lanes from PCH to Prospect. So you see kind of that continuity from PCH all the way to Flagler.
Question on the Beryl Street resurfacing. It was painted out one way and then it was redone. You know what you're familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes, they redesigned it. There was some redesign that
due to like residents, I know there was kind of an uproar at first, or was it not? Was it just related to the needs?
I think after some trial and error, it was redesigned to I think flow in a safer manner as you crossed east on Prospect.
Thanks.
Sports fishing pier demolition. This was an emergency demolition that was done a couple months ago to address safety issues down at the sports fishing pier. That's been completed. Community garden, again, down at Alta Vista, that project is wrapping up. And then we've had playground rubberized resurfacing at Aviation, Andrews, Perry, and Turtle Park. Those have all been completed. We'll have this as also an ongoing CIP. Next phase will be Anderson Park next year. These are just some of the highlights. They're not everything, but it's just to point out all the work that has gone into, as City Manager Wazanski said, we've done a lot of work this fiscal year. This is a snapshot of kind of the 5-year history of the projects, and I think one of the key things to know is the growth in projects. As you see, fiscal year 18-19, we had a total of 69 projects. To where we are now, 125 projects, double basically in the span of 5 years. And as Mike mentioned, in terms of expenditures, we're estimating about $24 million in expenditures. And you'll see the history over the last 5 years from $5 million in 18-19 to $24 million this year. That's due to just a lot of projects that were in design coming into construction, but also the added staff that we got this last fiscal year. Added a couple civil engineers, added a construction manager. That's really kind of helped to streamline some of these projects and get them going. Here we have estimated carryover funding for the current fiscal year. This is carryover funding is funds that have been appropriated to specific projects but have not been encumbered or expended. And this can happen for a multitude of reasons, such as phases of projects, delays outside the city's control, or work that crosses over multiple fiscal years. As illustrated, 67.4 in estimated carryover funding. Large portion of these, especially on the street side, which is the largest by value and by number of projects, $24.5 million. A lot of these have to do with regional metro funds that we have, such as the Inglewood MBB right turn lane. We're carrying over about $3 million there. The North Redondo Beach Bike Path Extension, we have 2 projects out there, about $3 million carrying over there. And then MBB resurfacing, Manhattan Beach Boulevard resurfacing, carrying over about $2.5 million there. That project is in the planning, in the design phase, going through an E76 process through Caltrans. So hopefully we can get that online in this upcoming fiscal year. Same thing with the waterfront. That's the second largest. You see about $20.6 million there. 7.9 million of that is Seaside Lagoon, all grant funded. Harbor dredging is about another $4.5 million there. Those plans and specs were just approved on Tuesday, and hopefully we'll be out to bid soon with a construction of next spring. That's the goal. And then the pier parking structure, critical repairs, that's $2.2 million. So those 3 projects alone make up almost 80% of the carryover funds in waterfront. Same thing with the sewer projects. It's at $9.4 million. $7.4 million is for one project, and that's the Portofino Yacht Club Way, which is currently in execution procurement. We awarded, so we're just waiting to hopefully kick that off in the next couple of months. And park projects as well, half of that, $4 million is for the Dominguez Park landscape improvements, which was awarded and going through contract award as well. So that should be kicking off. We actually had the bid opening today, so hopefully we'll award in the next month or so.
Is that purely like landscaping, plants and trees, that sort of thing? Or is there any kind of hardscape also part of that?
So it's landscaping and playground replacement equipment. So this is the upper side by the ballparks.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a whole, and this went through the Parks and Rec Commission, a whole new play equipment, and then landscaping, hardscape for people to walk and just clean up that area up there. So what are we recommending for the upcoming fiscal year? We have $21.7 million in recommended funding. As you'll see, I won't go through all of them, but some of the kind of the key highlights projects that are included in these totals. For the sewers, we kind of have our standard sewer sanitation facilities rehabilitation. This really helps make sure that, we keep any potential issues with the sewer down, sewer lining, root cleaning. That's a very, very successful program that we have. The drainage, this is mostly grants. We have the Fulton Playfield Infiltration Project that we received a $4.2 million grant through the Regional Measure W funding. So that's in the design phase. So hopefully we'll enter the construction phase shortly. And then key street projects, Kingsdale resurfacing should come online next year. Traffic signal communications and network improvements, that's a $3 million grant from the county, Regional Measure M money. So the next segments of those will hopefully be in the design phase. And then residential rehab, as I mentioned, we're wrapping up that $5 million phase of residential rehab. This next year, we'll enter into a design phase for the next cycle and potentially enter into construction towards the end of the fiscal year or the beginning of the 24-25. And then another point I want to mention is the public facility projects. I think you'll see that's the second largest in value of appropriations. I think one of the focuses for this upcoming year is one, getting through existing projects, which is why you don't see a lot of new projects added to this budget. We're putting some funding towards public facility improvements, right? We have a lot of our buildings, as no surprise to anybody, they're old, they're tired, they need some attention. So we're putting some money towards an assessment of City Hall, fire stations, the police department, bringing someone on, kind of determine our space, determine any potential improvements that we can make to our facilities to kind of bring them up to a condition that meet the standard for us to serve the public. We also are adding about $150,000 for some landscaping improvements out in the Civic Center. Hopefully just make it a more inviting area for the public as well. So that's kind of a focus next year. You'll see is just giving some attention to our facilities. We also have community services department who's up in North Redondo on Artesia. That's a leased facility. That lease comes up at the end of 2024. We're looking at where to relocate the department. So that's also some funding that's in there to try to address those issues. Summary for 23-24, I think Mike went over this. 67.4 in carryover funds, 21.8 recommended appropriations. 1.3 of that is for the 5 recommended new projects, and 20.5 for 38 existing projects. You see 130 total projects. On the right, you'll see the graph that illustrates the different categories of the projects. As you see, streets by far with 44 projects is our largest driver for CIPs. And again, we won't go through all of these, but this is just some of the highlights for next year that we hopefully will either construct or significantly have some movement on the design phase. Fulton Playfield I spoke about a little bit, Kingsdale as well. Some of the new projects are up here, the pier, solid waste, recycling, organics infrastructure. This is just to address some of the mandates from the state on organics recycling. The SE right-of-way west of PCH landscape improvements, this was added by the council to try to create some walking open space at the right-of-way by the old US Bank building. So we're in the design phase there. Hopefully we'll go into the construction phase of that phase 1 next year. And again, that concludes my formal presentation. So same recommendation as City Manager Wazanski mentioned, provide input recommendations to the City Council. I'm here for any questions if you have any.
Jesse, I didn't see anything in here that talked about residential street resurfacing, repaving, or any upgrades. Did I miss that?
Yeah, we have it's $2.6 million in recommended funding that we're putting towards residential rehab. Okay. So that's that, and that most of that is going to be going towards the next phase of the design. We're currently undergoing our PMS study, pavement management study. That will be completed in the next couple of months, and then that comes to council for discussion. They determine the next kind of segments, discuss what they want to concentrate on, and that'll kind of give us direction as to on how to design the next phase of that site, of the residential rehab.
So that's basically the scheduling and planning of the work that needs to be done.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's not already in place. It's decided.
Every
in
3
smaller
years. So every 3 years we do a PMS study, and the council then determines kind of the next 3 years
Of which streets.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Where would we find the current plan for what streets are going to be resurfaced? Or are they all completed now until we come up with the new plan for the next phase?
Yeah, this last phase has been completed. So yeah, this next PMS study will determine the next set of streets.
Should be out this fall, right, Jesse?
Correct.
And yeah, what the council ends up doing is every street segment gets a condition index figure, right? 0 to 100, 100 being perfect, 0 being basically, a dirt road. I think what our average PCI is now 70.
It was 72.
72
I think the goal
previously.
is 75.
Yeah.
So we'll see fairly shortly where we're at.
75 is a really good number by comparison to neighbors. I mean, Palos Verdes Estates, Rancho Palos Verdes, they've historically had pretty good PCIs. Ours is, on the flatland, ours is probably one of the best, given the volume of street traffic that we have. So we do very well there, but the pavement management study sets priorities, sets a range of options based on the council's investment, and prioritizes on an engineering approach rather than maybe a complaint-based approach. But what we've recognized over the years is there still has to be a little bit of a relief valve for the council to react to kind of concerned areas. So 90% of what goes into the residential rehab scope will be predicated on good, solid engineering, kind of PCI-related data. And then there might be a little component that is reacting to maybe a persistent complaint in various districts. But we try to keep it as methodical and sort of, mathematical as possible.
Are the residents on those streets notified in some way, like it's coming up in next month or that sort of thing?
It's we try to do some outreach as well, but it's required by the contractor to reach out to the residents, notify, let everyone know what's going, when it's going to occur. We're trying to schedule and put those schedules online as well. That's part of the CIP dashboard that has gone live now. So any updates on segments of streets, what construction schedules, we're trying to push that out so people are not caught off guard.
Great.
Yeah. Any other capital questions for Jesse?
No.
Anything? Yeah, it's kind of a back to, I've said it the last few years, sort of a back to basics CIP. It's not a real sexy document here where, the 5 projects that are new are pretty basic stuff. We're trying to hit the, major facilities, storefront improvements, things that are just in need. We always fund our roads well. We're fortunate to have the regional sources to pay for them. We don't have to dedicate as much in the way of general fund as we did a few years ago because we've got all the gas taxes and all the different measures that are out there. That's really helped. I mean, if anybody ever says, hey, well, where does our tax dollar go for Measure M or Measure R? We use the hell out of it. I mean, it is very valuable to us locally. We do a really good job, getting roads repaired with those funds. It's a really critical source of our capital program. So it served us well, and we'll continue to execute best we can. Yeah. So any other questions? Anything you'd like?
Or anything else you guys wanted to discuss in terms of recommendations to submit to council, or based on what we received? Because again, they're going to be voting on this prior to our next meeting, so.
Are there any decision packages that we feel as a body we want to make recommendations for or against before?
We've got the funds to cover these, as was pointed out. We seem to be in a good place, and it sounds like we're managing money pretty well overall. There are some things, just like we talked about, the fire department assessment fee. We had a similar thing that came up a few years ago with the developer fees for all the new construction. Nobody had visited that for like 10 or 15 years, and we missed the giant building boom and all the destruction to our streets. So that, I mean, other than something that I think our city manager is going to take in stride and be working on, I can't think of anything else.
No, nothing on mind as well. I mean, I think there was good
Well,
rigor and discipline.
candidly, a lot of what's in here is stuff that we've talked about. I mean, this is, I don't just wake up one morning and go, hey, let's roll these 77 out. I mean, it's an annual conversation. I've answered it, some of our community members when they ask me, why do you come, what's the backstory? Well, some of these decision packages have basis in dialogue with department heads for months, me asking them for performance improvements in certain areas and them saying, well, I'm trying, but I can't. I need a little bit of this. There's a lot of backstory here. You all point stuff out. I go back to work, or Eugene's had a lot of great suggestions. He and I talk about this stuff all the time. We got to look into that, and this is usually the outgrowth. So, it's something that is constantly deliberative in my mind.
Well, thank you to you and the team, because again, I know there's a lot of transition and understaffing and a lot lot that's gone into
this was a challenge.
this
I
type
mean,
of,
Wendy really deserves a lot of credit
when you jumped in midstream.
to get a document out like this. And, there's going to be a few errors in here. There's going to be some
Yeah.
cleanup stuff we'll have to do through BRI. This isn't going to be perfect. I can promise you that. But for her to produce this and on a shortened timeframe, and, we're still putzing around with the ACFR, and the fact that we were able to make this work is, really, it's, grateful to have Wendy. And, I don't know if she told you, but we've got a conditional offer out to an assistant finance director who has accepted and is in background right now.
That's great.
She's about to add
Congratulations.
some-
Help.
It
Yeah.
is great.
Add
It is
some help
great.
to the team. So,
Wendy's going to be taking a lot of vacations.
yeah, she's,
She deserves one.
You got a lot of work to do and
first
stuff.
person
So.
to sign up for a 6-week vacation. I've never seen that.
Yeah. If I may provide some input, since you're saying you don't have specific, recommendations, it's always great to have the support to let council know that what was presented, you do support as you see fit, just to know that you vetted it and we've shared everything and city manager's been as transparent. It gives a good accolade to the budget to proceed, and maybe, in case they have any questions, that it's been vetted by you all, because your opinion really counts. That would just be my suggestion, that I always try with commissions to make sure they get their input in their short blurb saying, whatever you'd like about, the presentation as a whole.
And no pressure. Hey, if it's always just good enough
Yeah.
that you all are supportive of what's being proposed. If it's that simple, well, that's an easy thing to write in the staff report on the 20th.
If you want
No
a thumbs
letter
up,
required.
little thumbs up, we're okay with that.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, you.
For almost a year, we have been suggesting and asking for a single line item for how much it is, the homeless situation, how much it is costing the city. I just read a couple days ago that this California state is spending $17 billion. So I'm sure as one of the largest beach city, it must be costing us something, but there is no single line item, no visibility for what's costing the city.
Well, and help me understand specifically in what expenditure category. I may have missed that in terms of.
I remember his question a few months ago was in addition to the pallet shelters,
Oh, I'm
which I
sorry.
think we're expanding that, but
Yes.
what other city services are we providing that is a cost that would be, I guess, allocated to the homeless?
The homeless program, yes. So we have a series of things. The budget includes a grant-funded mental health clinician that we talked about. We have Lila Amora, who we were funding through our general fund, our housing navigator. That's roughly $160,000 a year. Our pallet shelter program costs us a little under $500,000 a year on an operating basis, that we have a partnership with Harbor Interfaith that contracts that. Thankfully, we've been able to pay for all of that through grant funds thus far. And there continues to be a prospect for more grant funds going forward. So we feel good about that. The Police Department Quality of Life Unit, we funded a dedicated full-time sergeant to supervise those operations. It's not just for homelessness, but that's a big part of what they do in quality of life. We've added part-time MSO and CSO officers to help respond on quality of life issues, not always related to homeless, but sometimes. So, on an annualized basis, I could safely tell you, although it's spread out among a series of departments, our annual cost for homeless-related response is well over $1 million a year. But the only charge thus far the only two charges thus far that are currently general fund related on an ongoing core basis are our housing navigator position, which is imperative to everything we do. She is really the hub. She is the hub to the entire operation. She's who makes contact with our homeless population. And then I would say a pro rata share of that dedicated sergeant position really spends a lot of his time on homelessness. So a sergeant position on an annualized basis is about $220,000, $240,000 a year. You could argue about half of that is probably dedicated specifically to homelessness. So I'd say out of pocket, general fund is somewhere in the ballpark of $300,000 to $350,000 a year of dedicated funding. The balance of that money being covered by state grants, county grants. And we are gobbling that money up all the time.
To Commissioner Jeski's prior point from a couple months ago, though, the issue was we've got these expenses spread out amongst multiple departments. I think city attorney's office as well, right?
Yeah. Which is where Lila sits. Yeah.
For you, because you're dealing with all of the departments and all the grants and the costs and everything, you're able to very eloquently come up with all the pieces and kind of what the cost is. But what we as a body ask for is something that kind of
lays it out.
Yeah, because there's for the rest of us, we can't do what you just did and come up with what a total cost to the city.
Well, I'll tell you what,
program.
We'll after the council's going to take their action. Obviously, that mental health clinician is a new piece to the homeless puzzle. I can commit to you that when we get back to you for your regular meeting, are you having a meeting in July?
No, we are not.
Why?
No. But I think to add, City Manager, one of the things we mentioned last meeting was that there was a lot of recommendations of certain reporting, and because of transition, we're trying to establish reporting that's meaningful to them. That was one on our docket to add. So I haven't quite defined that yet because we haven't had a standard meeting. But some of the information was not relevant based on their meetings, and they had a request. So I have those down. I just haven't developed,
I think we could probably get you something in August that kind of lays that out for you, and we can help you understand in its entirety what that looks like. I mean, I understand it is across the board. The challenge is, what we do is when that sergeant might, he or she will pivot to other functions that are quality of life related. So sometimes we're making some estimates of time and allocation. So we could do that. And we can help paint that picture. And it's an evolving picture. I mean, there's a budget response report that's actually, the council's requested, it talks about expanding the pallet shelter program and actually adding more. Because our goal with that program, right, between that permanent supportive housing and all of our outreach efforts is to eventually get to a point where we can safely say, by law, the Ninth Circuit ruling, we have a bed available for anybody who is sleeping in our park or on our streets. Once we can make that statement very clear, we can begin to reinforce and enforce, like we used to, our no camping, no sleeping ordinances that we used to have in those facilities. That's the top of the mountain in terms of being able to address the homeless problem. We can go to anybody who's out there and say, we've got a place for you. If you refuse to go, okay, then we can enforce our ordinance. Hopefully they'll take our advice and move on, but that's when we've really addressed at least our local issue. We're getting close. We're getting close. But I'll try to get you, we'll get you breakdown. I had forgotten about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the real concern is that we don't lose, that we keep track of that over time, because this is
It evolves.
a politically sensitive and could be economically devastating item. And so we just don't want to lose track of what that real cost is.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair question. It's a good policy question. I think it's worth talking about. And I've said this to this group before. It's, outside of some of the real basic things we do, it's maybe the most critical issue we need to address right now for quality of life in our community. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more important thing for us right now.
You should read that article on the city of Portland. They highlighted that, and this is the front page story. It was fascinating in the sense it shows how much the cities are spending and how much it has affected other areas like theft, crime, drugs, disease. All these things are affected, and we spend enormous amount of time and money. But it's all scattered all over the budget, so we cannot identify it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say our efforts have been effective. They have made a difference. They're not all the way there. They're not perfect. They haven't solved the problem, but I promise you the attention that we're spending, there is value in what we are investing in this response. It is making a difference. It is what's keeping the problem at bay in our community. If it doesn't take, you don't have to drive far to see how other communities are dealing with this or not dealing with it. So I appreciate the question. We'll get you something in August. We can do that. Yep. All right.
Anything else?
Well, any particular message you want me to carry on, or, just.
I just have one, is it involves all of us, is how are we going to communicate with the city council what our priorities and questions are and things that I'm just not familiar with how that takes place. Is there something?
Well, we can make a motion to be, either saying we're in support of what was proposed here tonight, we've read it and vetted it, and just kind of more of a general one, but if there's also specific things that anyone here wants to specifically say, I'm in support of these individual items, or I'd like to amend or, not recommend certain items, you can just make a motion to do that. We can vote on that, and that would be forwarded along to the
And if
council.
you just make a motion, if it's that concise, what we typically do is we'll take draft minutes and we'll attach it to the budget response report. So when they say, well, what did the Budget and Finance Commission have to say? We said, well, their motion's attached here in the draft minutes, and go from there.
That's what I was going to propose, because I didn't see any strong opposition to any of the decision packages or anything that was presented tonight, which is great. That's what having the money to do it. And to your guys' credit, you put together an easier to understand presentation. So,
Well, and the line item detail in here and the stuff that you see in the pages, that's from your council over the years. We've evolved this budget. It's first time we've been able to see year over year and on the actual basis. I mean, a lot of the way this is formatted is to your credit.
so unless as a group chair, we want to prepare a letter for council, I would just move that we accept the decision packages and the proposed budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Do you want to do a roll call vote, Doug?
Yeah.
Or do you want to discuss? Sorry. I'm sorry. My apologies.
The only thing I
Parliamentary procedure.
wanted to do was just provide a little bit of feedback in that same thing that you're talking about putting together. I appreciate the fact that you were here tonight to answer specific questions, and that Wendy wasn't the only one under the gun. It sounds like she's been working pretty hard, so she
Try to
deserves a
support
relief.
Wendy. She has definitely been working hard.
Appreciate all the information. My questions for the most part were clarifications more than anything else to just understand what's going into this. And the budget is getting more detailed. It's getting clearer at the same time. And all I can say is with all the work that went into it, there were places that I didn't think I was seeing things until I started digging into some of the detail. So I'm sure this is a work in progress.
It is.
And there's nothing wrong with what's here. It's a work in progress and I like the changes.
Yeah, well, and that's good, and I appreciate that, because we've tried to be responsive to some of the feedback, and this, Mel knows this, we've been around a while. Some of the questions and suggestions you've made over the years, we've tried to incorporate in this, and I think what's good with some continuity now, we'll have the ability to build on this over time and really have a document that we can fully understand and digest. So we're getting there, and thank you for your help on this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there, okay, or was there anything specific you wanted to either amend or propose, or?
No, I think I'm going to follow up with Mike with some information on those electric vehicles, and then we're going to let the staff come up to a conclusion about when we want to start executing the purchase of some of those, if that's.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you would forward whatever you've got to Wendy, she'll get it to me. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sure. I'll
Yeah.
Absolutely.
the information.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, thank you.
No, absolutely.
That's fine.
Doug, do we want to do a roll call vote?
Sure.
Also, for the record, there's no public comment or anything like that going on.
Can we also, for the record, the motion didn't have the 5-year CIP, just to be
Yes.
consistent,
Should we restate it?
please.
Would you like to include this?
Or we can just amend it, but.
Yeah, amended, sorry.
Amend the motion to include accepting the 5-year CIP as presented also.
Okay.
Second.
Commissioner Conroy,
Aye.
Commissioner Jesty.
Aye.
Commissioner Castle.
Aye.
Chair Marin,
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham,
Aye.
Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Sherbin.
Aye.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you.
All right.
And should I say, I appreciate the fact that our city treasurer was here, making sure
Watch.
that we were.
Is that watching the entire time? Exactly.
You saw his picture in the budget this year.
Yeah, exactly. Do I need to make an official motion to close J1, or?
We have recommendations of staff or.
Yeah, I was gonna move to the,
Oh,
I just didn't know if I
I'm
have to close J1 or.
Yeah, I
We're
think
closed.
with that vote, it's closed, right?
Okay, perfect. Then moving on to item K, member items and referrals to staff. So Commissioner Conley?
I have one thing. In preparation for this meeting, I was going to watch the last city council meeting, and it's I think nearly 5 hours long. There's no audio on it at all. So I don't know if that can be fixed or if that's a lost opportunity. I just wanted to make staff aware of it. Maybe if I noticed there was some commission meetings that came after that had sound. So if there was a glitch, it looks like it was fixed. But I just wanted to make sure
Sure.
staff was aware of that.
You were talking about the last meeting on Tuesday night?
Yes.
Yeah. I noticed that too, because I had clicked on from my office to watch through YouTube. I think they had
They were
3
made aware.
different channels going, trying to connect. I don't know what happened, but you can also if you go to the city website under the agendas, you can watch it through the city site, and that had volume on it. Just
That's good for me to know. I only went to the YouTube site.
Because usually the YouTube is, there's less of a lag. And so I usually go to YouTube as well. But for whatever reason that night, I'm sorry, it wasn't working. I don't know what happened to that. But if you want to go back through the city site, you can watch it. It does have volume on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jesty?
I don't have it.
Commissioner Castle? Nothing from me?
Nothing for me.
Nothing here.
All right. Guess motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So we'll see each other in August? Or the question was, are we having a meeting in July?
I'm not sure. I thought,
They said July 8th, but then we had, I just got updated, like recently there was some cancellation because of the July timeframe, so we can confirm if you'd like.
I'm going to be out of town, so I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
sure.
what they had told us they had received from you all, that there was not, people were enough, they were
Okay.
out, but we can confirm.
Have quorum, that's the reason for it?
They were saying, that's what the city clerk was asking us, and I was going to confirm with you also.
I'm out.
Who else is out?
Can anyone else do July 8th?
I should be here.
We can also.
Yes, I am also out.
Okay, just remember. Okay.
Yeah, I'm out of the country, so.
Same.
July is a good month not to come in.
We'll see each other in August.
Wait a second, no, we can't do this on July 8th because July 8th is a Saturday.
Okay.
Okay, hold on.
July
I'm sorry, it says
6th.
July 13th is what it says on there.
July
My fault.
13th would be the next date.
I quoted the wrong. I'm still out.
I'm here.
Anyone else? Or should we just see each other in August?
If we have quorum and it's
Quorum.
on our calendar, we should.
Then let's book it for July 8th and we'll, and if you're not gonna be able to be here,
Okay, we'll-
notify the office and.
We'll confirm. They asked me
Yes,
today
cancel.
and I told them I would mention it to you and maybe there was something I didn't know, because
well-
Doug always keeps me abreast and I was like, that doesn't rhyme with what
Yeah,
Doug had said, so.
So I wasn't sure. I hadn't heard anything. But again, it would be that July
13th.
13th date, which is that second Thursday.
Yep.
We'll schedule it for then.
Yeah,
If I hear, you guys can contact me directly. If we don't have enough for a quorum, I'll let you know.
sounds good.
But we'll schedule it for that date.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doug.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, good night.
Good night.
Okay.